Bliss and Grit is an entirely listener-supported show. Supporting us is also designed to support you through keeping the episodes rolling, but also through rewards for your donation, like a Getting Started guide, a private forum, and downloadable meditations. To become a supporting member, you can visit patreon.com/bliss and grit. Hello, beautifuls. You're listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I will be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're talking about being on the embodied spiritual path and what does that actually mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, all the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? Today, we're having a conversation with Lissa Boles of the Soul Map about purpose. So one of our real motivations with this show is to marry the spiritual path with our tangible human lives. And in reality, they're exactly one and the same, but they do often get divided in the places where these conversations happen. That said, one of the things that we hear from you all about frequently that is something you ponder or wrestle with or have questions about is the issue of living one's purpose. And Lissa's work is really the marriage or the intersection of the spiritual path with how we live out our life's purpose, particularly in the area of our career or our right work, and how you follow your being to what your right work actually is. So we thought she would be fantastic to have on. Some of the things we touch on in our conversation are conscious culture making, how actively intending to change culture is really an extraordinary thing and pretty uniquely front and center at this particular time in human history. We get at how to recognize that we're part of a creative process and also how to see our lives, signs, and signals as cues to our own unique process and right work. And we touch on the trouble with I don't know, which some of you may have heard me say in past episodes tends to be one of my favorite mantras, but Lissa very artfully exposes its shadow side in the episode here. If you're enjoying the show, we would be delighted if you left a review on iTunes or on our Facebook page. You can also head over to blissandgrit.com and subscribe there for our weekly digestive resources that we love. Or, as you heard in the intro to the intro, become a supporting member and get all of the benefits of that, which is at patreon.com/blissandgrit. So last thing, Vanessa and I swear, so headphones if you need them. Okay, here we go. Hi, Lissa, and hi, Vanessa.
Hi, ladies. Hello.
Lissa, it's very sweet to have you on the show. For those listening, Lissa and I have a friendship that goes back a long ways. Mm-hmm. And we're very excited to have you on because it's a little bit of a different take from some of what we've been doing. We talk to a lot of people whose work life might be described as spiritual teacher. And you work in this interesting place of spiritual path, but also, purpose, and how do we consciously create culture? And we're dealing with a time in the world right now where I think a lot of us feel pretty stressed out and pressurized and like, how do I help? How do I make a change? How do I make a difference? And I think you're one of the people who's talking about that in a really beautiful way. So we're excited to do a show with you where we can kind of bring that in for people who are feeling like, how do I participate in a way that creates meaningful change? Mm-hmm. So maybe we can start with you in your own words, describing how you see your work and the different bridges that it makes between worlds.
Right. Thank you. And thanks for the way you just articulated that. It took me a long time to see it, but, everyone takes for granted, or most people take for granted, that each individual has a purpose, a reason for existing. There's lots of juju about that, which can cause a lot of confusion and misdirection and all kinds of shenanigans. Mm-hmm. But what I've come to see over the years, as I've investigated the shenanigans that mess us up, myself included, is that, the desires, the expectation is that if we fulfill our purpose, if we will fulfill ourselves and we will offer something the world needs, and the world will therefore change for the better. So there's a set of assumptions that go along with this. And I've witnessed my own self as I work with clients and as I live the way that I do, asking myself, does that prove out? Like, let's just verify. Does that tend to prove out? And what I see fairly consistently is that it does, with limited effects most of the time. Because the way to it really is a practice. Drawing yourself forward enough that you can be clear enough to be sort of in your lane without applying limitations to yourself, because we got to, they're two different things. It's the work of a lifetime. And it really takes a lot of deep practice. There are certain things that have to be cultivated. And that I didn't know these things when I just went in with usually the same set of assumptions most people do. I didn't recognize that presence was something that was required. Because in no place in my own trainings or the things that I'd read or absorbed through teaching, had presence been discussed in the early days of my own exploration of purpose and how to apply it, that became an absolute necessity. And there wasn't a lot of discussion about how to help yourself cultivate it. So that's just one example. But what I did see when I began to notice the things that needed to be cultivated, absolutely fundamentally, and when they were, the increasing effect of change in the world started to appear more consistently. When those things weren't being discussed and focused upon and cultivated, individual fulfillment did increase, but it didn't always result in change out there. And that became an issue for me because, in my view, purpose fulfilled is a tandem thing. If we're the only ones who are affected, then we're only getting half of the meal. And us fulfilling our purpose just so we benefit is, how different is that from anything else that's on offer? Not really all that different. And it means that the promise of your life isn't actually being fulfilled the way it was meant to be. And so I became kind of disaffected and disenamored and kind of disillusioned by a lot of the stuff I saw and participated in, because it didn't contain both components. And when it did, it didn't have enough of, so how do I actually live this? How do I live this in real time, in material ways, as a human being, as a woman? All those things, they just, there were pieces, but they weren't all together. And that's what I found both disheartening and opportune, because that ended up being where my work took its focus from. And a little bit beyond that, although in the early days I didn't really like it, because I left the world of work because I wanted freedom to pursue my spiritual path. The idea of this having a business focus just in the early days just kind of made me do this. But I've come to see that we're attempting, so everybody says, I want to change it. Well, what does that really mean? We're trying to actually change the culture because the culture isn't working for everybody. It hurts us. People are being hurt all over the place because of the values, the incongruency with values, the incongruency with, character, like all kinds of wacky stuff. Laws, they're written, but they're not exactly followed, and there are exclusions for them, but not for it's just, we're like, what do you mean you want to change the world? We want to change the culture. Well, that's an extraordinary thing when you stop to consider that at no time in human history has there ever been a class of any kind, any study of any kind on how to create culture. Ever. For anyone. It has been done in the same way that leadership has always kind of, until recent years, it was just expected to emerge at the hands of those who had choice and power and privilege. Well, geez, that's not working so good. So when I really sat with it and I looked at all the components, all the pieces, all the things that go into this, it's spiritual path, fulfilling both sides of the equation, the promise of my life fulfilled for me, but also fulfilling a promise I made when I came here to add and contribute something that makes the world a better place, that helps us learn how to culture change. So that more of what is true shows up materially and congruently in the world. And the place that I'm watching that, and this is my particular orientation because I think it's my place to serve, is in the business world. It's addressing things like, so how do you remain spiritually connected and attempt to make money? How do you spiritually serve through transformational work and ask for money? Like, how do you navigate that when even the sages of old wanted nothing to do with it because it was a slippery slope they didn't even know how to navigate? How do we do that? Because if we don't address that in the culture, and particularly in Western culture, because profit and GDP is the it's the founding focus of the Western world. So when I look at this, I see purposeful people attempting actively and with a great deal of frustration, because there's a lot of confusion about this, actively attempting to fulfill themselves and fulfill their life's promise independently and collectively, although it's a collective movement without a leader. It's really interesting. In a way that changes the foundations of the Western world, the culture of the West. It was a mouthful.
Yeah.
A really good
there
one.
Were, maybe about 20 salient points I'd love to pick up on.
Shut up, no.
I thought, Lissa, it could even be interesting for you to share a little bit about how you found your purpose. Maybe that'll even make it more tangible, because you have this beautiful way of bringing the formless into form. So maybe we could bring it down to earth by you sharing how you came upon your purpose.
And what the lived practice looks like a little bit that you were referencing.
Well, let me start with the first part. I came to know my purpose in fits and starts, as most people do, because I had no place to go. And that's why, in large part, I do what I do, because I wanted to offer. It just broke my heart that most people are herky-jerky with it and dealing with so many of the misconceptions and misdirections and, incomplete bits of information. That's why I offer a piece of the work that I do, because I wanted to, without shortchanging the process, because it is a process, I wanted to offer people more of the information that they need in a more focused place. But my journey was really herky-jerky. It was in fits and starts, and it was mostly on my own. I didn't study with anybody who had a particular focus on purpose, mostly because every time I attempted to learn from someone, with an exception of one guy, there's a guy by the name of Greg Lavoie who wrote an extraordinary book called Callings, and it was the most helpful material I came across at that point. But other than that, every time I connected with a piece of work or a body of teachings, something had me stay on the sidelines with it, because there were pieces that did click and pieces that didn't. And I knew I was feeling something at that point I couldn't even quite name. So my process was I learned to follow a gut sense, a kind of intuition. When something jumped off the page or the screen or in a conversation, it just jumped at me, I would pay attention to that piece. And I'd explore further until it stopped clicking. And then I'd go back and I'd take that piece and I'd actually catalog it. And over the course of time, I looked for the synergistic connections between those various pieces. And that's when I saw the larger body of what was going on. And I go, okay, so I'm actually paying attention to something holistic, but it's so disjointed, I have to go all over the place to draw it in. That plus I was wildly drawn to life coaching, although that was an adventure in and of itself, because it was a piece. But like most people, I assumed that it was it, that I'd landed, that it was it was the answer. Eureka, I found it.
We want it so bad.
Vanessa and I are it reporting to each other all the time.
Finally, it. I can just be here.
Yes. Well, there's a difference between being here, which is it's true and it's real and it's potent, and finding it, because we live in a world that teaches us reductivism, and purpose is not reductive. You can't do that. You can arrive at a synergistic understanding of a larger whole, but you can't be reductive, because that squeezes the substance and life right out of it. And we're not taught how to be holistic. It's amazing to me. I talk to holistic practitioners all the time who approach life from a reductive point of view.
Me too.
And it messes with them. It messes with them. And I hadn't realized I was doing the same thing until I actually took a look at this catalog and went, oh, I wouldn't have called it holism, but in the years since, I've come to realize that's what it is. And I had to cultivate that ability in myself. It's a talent. It's a sensibility. I think we're all born with it, but we are kind of indoctrinated out of it. And it takes a good long while to kind of bring yourself back. The other piece that kind of got me, so the Eureka, I found it, that knocked me for 6. And I kind of went, have I been playing with my mind? What am I doing here? I didn't realize it was the notion that was the problem and not me. And that was a substantial piece of the work. It's like, so let's look at this, folks. What if the notions that have been planted up here about spirituality, about all these things, what if those are the misdirections we need to pay attention to? What if the assumptions that go along with them are the problem and not you? Because we live with this, I've got it screwed up, or I'm blocked, or it's all about, like, we're so centered in it that we're the problem. I'm broken. I'm not. It's like, no, let's take apart thinking that you've inherited or adopted or assumed, because that's largely what's going on. The third piece of it was astrology. I still stumble over saying that. And Brooke, Brooke and I connected about the time I was trying to find a way to exercise this talent that I have without telling anybody what it involved. I mean, who the hell wants to say, I'm an astrologer? So number one, I'm not an astrologer. I have a gift for reading the symbology of astrology. But so I don't like to be pigeonholed. And most of the people I talk to are not interested in being pigeonholed, because that is a reductive point of view. We are label resistant or allergic for good reason, because most of us are synergizers. We're attempting to bring back in the wholeness of what we have to control, because it's a synergy. It's a concert of things. And you have to be attendant to the concert enough that you witness your own process and what you're drawing in, so that you can essentially be the orchestra you're meant to be, as well as playing the music that's in your soul. It's a really interesting phenomena. And so the astrology piece, I really didn't want to go there, because I was, at that point, I had worked my ever-loving tail off to build a coaching career and to kind of find a credibility as a business person to warrant someone investing, hard-earned money in the services that I offered. And I was, at that point, it was, I had just gotten married to a man who had 2 teenage daughters. So I was a stepmother for the first time. So newly married, mortgage for the first time, two-step, like I had a whole bunch of stuff to be responsible for all at the same time, all of a sudden. And that just felt like too much of a risk, that if I admitted I used astrology, people would think I'd, and I blow it. And it wasn't my risk alone anymore. It was the risk of my family, the risk of there were just a lot of people to consider. So I kind of got, hung up on that until I talked to this one, because she was instrumental. I actually shared with her this thing that I do with astrology that didn't have a name at the time and has since been called the Soul Map. And at the end of it, she said one thing that has stuck with me and guided me ever since. She said, so you told me I have some really interesting, I don't really want to tell people superpowers that I've got to out myself for. I'll make you a deal. I dare you to go public with yours, and I'll go public with mine.
That Brooke, she'll get you.
She'll get you every time. And I was like, and she's a no bullshit person, as inquiringly honest and straightforward as they come. I relied on her, and still to this day do, for, the skinny on things. If I'm goofing around with my head, she will lovingly tell me I am. Because my freedom matters to her. I count on it. So I knew that as she said that, I really did have to. And then she said one more thing that, again, I'll never forget, because it was loving, but it was searing. She said, I'm not sure that you can call yourself a calling coach and then keep this under wraps.
I never remember these things that I say, but I've been described as searing by a few people, so I know it must be
into
true.
The brain. And I knew she was right. I absolutely knew she was right. So I talked it over with my beloved, who's since died, and explained the circumstances and situation to him. And because it was a risk we had to take as a family, I was not going to take it independently, because I really was afraid it was going to blow up our income. And together we crafted a really simple website. I said only what I knew to say, which wasn't a whole lot. Actually retold the story of what this woman said and one other friend, and then pressed publish, and took another piece of I dare you advice from Brooke, which was, I'll tell 10 friends, you tell 10 friends. Like that was the first step. So I said, your inner circle, the people you wouldn't otherwise tell.
I think I might have been right up in that beginning group.
That's exactly right. Good memory. And so we pressed publish. It went live on the internet. No one was watching, but that didn't stop me from running to the bathroom to throw up. That's how scared I was. Like, bleh.
Yeah.
And then I proceeded to honor the homework, and I made appointments to talk with 10 people. And what happened over the course, because 10 people became 20 people, became 30 people, my business did blow up, but not in the way I expected. I went from, nobody knows about this, but the people don't say anything to anybody because this is kind of a secret, to, could you be on our podcast? Would you please come and teach a class? I went from no clients for this astrological service to booked solid for 6 months straight, 6 days a week. Like it was stupid. I didn't know how to handle it and be present in it. So I learned about attendance, presence, self-care, legitimize, like a whole bunch of the principles that are key to living purpose well and with a solid material foundation from those early days. I just didn't have the language for it. So that's where the astrology piece came in. Largely because I do have a talent for it. I cannot explain. But also because over time I came to recognize that, like me, most of us cannot see who we really are, what we're really made of, because so much of what we've taken in and what has been impressed upon us or enculturated into us puts blinders on, which makes it very difficult for us to see ourselves truly. And so the soul map is an opportunity to see yourself as robustly as possible, taking for granted that your full potential is being lived. This is what that looks like. This is why this is here. This is why that's part of your makeup, et cetera, et cetera. It even describes the path of progressive evolutionary mastery you're going to take yourself on, so that you're going to learn the things you need to on the way to increasing liberation, so that you can be the kind of president you need to be, so that you can have the kind of wisdom and groundedness you're supposed to. That changed the trajectory for me considerably, and taught me. I mean, the truth is, the work we have to do through purpose, if a body of work is in your soul, and those tend to be the people I work with. The work that you're here to teach is your work first, last, foremost, and always. You're always going to be doing your own work. That's how you know it as well as you do. That's what keeps you real and humble and human. It is the center, and it makes it possible for you to know what's going on for someone, because you can smell it. I mean, it rings your bells because you're either in the throes of it again in another way, or you've walked it recently. It is what connects you with compassion and empathy and realness to what the people you're here to serve are living and challenged by. It is your life's PhD. It's progressive, it's evolutionary, it's very purposeful in terms of how do you live this in real terms. And it's what draws out your very best. It's what cultivates your wisdom and presence. And it's also what teaches you why what you have lived, good, bad, and ugly, is there to be used and how to use it. One of the things I've also come to realize is that this path of evolutionary mastery of your own way to wisdom in a lot of ways, it's about, so how do I reach out into the imaginal world we're all are connected to, and draw from it the piece my life's meant to bring in, adding to the mix less confusion, less egoic, misunderstanding, less, no, I want it to turn out that way. How do we help more of the imaginal vision our life's promise wants to make present in the world? How do we do that more effectively every single day? How do we do that? Because we have to bring it here for it to manifest here. And it has to come through our efforts and our practice and our life. It has to. That's the only way it comes. We're the agent, we're the transmission, we're the bridge. And I found that it is changing the way spiritual practice gets done. It's kind of, the word intersectionality has come out of the feminist movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, and many social justice issues in the last couple of years have made me aware of this notion of intersectionality. So I'm going to use that word to help describe what this is like too. The intersection of money making and business, transformational bodies of work and service, and spiritual practice, as well as personal evolution, are all intersecting. It's a grassroots movement that is being driven, as far as I can tell, by God, Spirit, the Almighty, like whatever word or phrase makes sense to you, but it is a living, intelligent force that is moving millions in active, ongoing, earnest attempt to change things through our own contribution, to learn how to change culture. So instead of it happening by default and only by those in power with privilege, it is something the average citizen becomes capable of. And that purpose is a vehicle of that. It is addressing itself most particularly, as far as my work is concerned, in small business and large. But I'm seeing it happen in government. I'm seeing it active in civic action and social justice. Like, I'm seeing it all over the place. So it doesn't just have to address itself in business, but it has very material interests these days It wants to see things actually change. And it's calling us to look at consciousness issues in ways we never have before. So the act of consciousness practice is being updated by input from real people still being hurt by the fact that there's places where we're still blind. And we have to be open to that and then bring it in intersectionally so that we update everything all at the same time. It doesn't happen in this tiny little slice of things. It happens across the board. So the challenge factor's gone up too. I mean, we're working hard right now. And I am both deeply touched and very hopeful. At the same time, I'm nervous just like everybody else. Because how clear we're able to bring this down and then make it holistic. So intersectionality is an expression of holism. How that's happening, there's fits and starts because a lot of us don't know this. Even those who are really actively devoted to practice, because we're still, in many cases, we're still looking at our spiritual life as distinct and apart from the rest of our life.
Yeah.
And it's not. We're still looking at spiritual practice as if it's got nothing to do with our work life, or we're looking at our work life as it's got nothing, and it is intersectional. Like we talk about it, everything's connected. And I'm like, okay, so show me how you're actually living that. And how can I help you live that more? Because that's the challenge today. How can we live that more fully and watch it to see where it's working and where it's not, where the outcomes, not just for us, but the outcomes in, the social sphere are actually being moved and changed and improved. And not just for us, but for everybody.
Yeah. And I kind of want to out a couple of places in myself that I have really gone into the weeds with my own practice of trying to find, live, and follow purpose as a way to maybe bring some of the things forward here that would be useful in the conversation. So 2 of the things that came to mind. One is easier to touch on, so I'll just start with that and we'll see if we go there or not. Sometimes, especially in our culture, Western culture, particularly you're Canadian, but let's say particularly American culture, we think purpose is about doing something big and important. And if I'm not the person on the stage, or the person writing the book or, and I don't even think that this necessarily comes from harmful narcissism. I really think it's just even for the people who have, a lot of, are strong empaths and very sensitive beings, there's still this idea that if it's not big and important or recognized as big and important by the world, then you're not living your purpose. Go find the big and important one. So that's one thread. I just want to say them because otherwise I'll lose them. That's how my brain works these days. And then the other one is, as you're talking about what we're grappling with culturally right now, something that I have done and can do is I can go, okay, well, I'm a mom and I'm a Rolfer, a manual therapist and a movement educator. And I do some work like this in the public sphere. But none of that stuff that's really alive and true to me matters because I should be doing something really important. I should be helping the people who are oppressed in a much more direct way. And so everything that my life has been about was a luxury. Fuck that. And so I need to, devote myself 100% of the time to a particular kind of activism. And then I get caught in this, my lived life and the accumulation of what my particular callings are don't count anymore because the world's really in trouble. So I've got to go over to this other thing. So if we could touch on that too, because I think that's another place that I see in our drive to really create change, we can actually abandon ourselves and tell ourselves that what our callings are not good enough or not the right ones or not the approved of ones.
Yep. So I'm going to stick with the second one. You may have to remind me what the first one is because my mind works.
We'll all just grab it, whatever thought forms we can keep.
You're absolutely right. So one of the notions of purpose See, most people, there's two pieces here. So let me just say them out loud and ask you to hold them with me. So if I forget the second one, you can come back. Yeah. So the first one is external signaling. Okay? And I'll come back to that in a second. And the other is the legitimization of your own purpose. And the fact that creates a kind of guardrail when signaling happens. So first one, signaling. Let's talk about that. The vast majority of purposeful, and so the general consensus is purpose comes from the divine. But the way we have been enculturated to attempt to find it or live it has been through what I call external signaling. We've been taught to look for it externally. And when a signal like the social justice movement that's been really alive and very potent these last half dozen years comes along, people tend to feel like you do. Instead of asking themselves, so within my own lane, how am I called to be a voice for or a contributor to social justice within my lane, so that we don't get, yanked around and pulled because we're still indoctrinated to go external because of signals that come at us, and often because judgment comes at us. So there's a woman I know, gorgeous voice. She's a writer and a teacher and a whole bunch of other things. And she is a highly sensitive introvert who uses deep inquiry as part of her process, both personally and her form of contribution. And she is a woman of mixed heritage. She's seen as Black by most people, but she has some white heritage as well. And she had been accused by other white or Black women, particularly, of not being loud enough, of not doing agency and activism properly, because she wasn't doing it like they were. And she wrote this extraordinary post and said, look, I am this, I am that. Those are accepted expressions of my being. They came baked into me, courtesy of the divine. And I'm not going to defend that to you because it needs no defense. If the good Lord thought that I was supposed to be this way, so that means that my activism is meant to be expressed through this. And one of the ways that I engage is through curious inquiry. Question is a powerful thing. Question offered with genuine curiosity, not passive aggressive gotcha, changes things. So what I heard when I read this, I was just like stunned, because she knew what her lane was. She had embraced the power of the fact that she was highly sensitive, the fact that she is an introvert, and the fact that potent questions offered with genuine love and real curiosity change things. She knew that she had that power. And so she didn't get pulled by signaling away from her thing. Yeah. She knew what it was. So even though her belonging was being challenged, she knew she belonged to herself. And so that's one of the key things, the development of legitimacy, the self-legitimizing of our makeup, so we know how that power works to offer transformation, allows us to remain planted so that when a signal comes and a challenge to belonging happens, we know we still belong to us. Our powers belong to us. They've come to us through the divine, and that, like, we're in our own lane. And that allows us to have that sensibility. These are the guardrails. I know what they are. This is my process. This is how it works. And you can challenge me all you like, but I know this. It's kind of like you look at the back of an Oprah magazine, and she often writes, "This is what I know for sure." And that's kind of what this is like. These are the things I know for sure. I'm open to discover more, but I know this. It is unassailable. So that when moments and movements like this happen, you can turn towards your own process and ask questions to discover how it answers the call to be a part of or contribute to something without leaving your primary contribution itself. Mm-hmm. And again, there's core principles, and capacities that need to be cultivated that nobody's really talking about. And that causes all kinds of problems for people because they don't know that they have a process. There's no learning around that I've come across that teaches us how to look for them and then to build legitimacy so that see, a lot of people talk about you got to own it. Well, what does that mean? Because most people are approaching it cognitively, and I'm not talking about a cognitive, I own this, it's mine. It's like, wait a second. Is it legitimate? Does it actually bear fruit in the world, in your life and in the lives of other people? Is it a legitimate, potent thing? How have you seen that? Have you watched it work? See, you, Brooke, I go back to you and those series of questions. Those were potent, but what preceded it was what made me willing to accept her dare. And it was this. I did this crazy thing I didn't have a name for. I was nervous, but I knew she was a safe place to do it. And then she came back to me and said, you have no idea what this did. And then she gave me this laundry list of facts it had. And I just went, all of a sudden the legitimacy of it, apart from my own worries and anxieties and concerns and human, it was unassailable because it had happened in her life. All I did was show up and do my thing. But it was legitimate. In that moment, I could see the value of it. And so legitimacy and value are intimately connected. But it only happens through experience. It's not something you can cognitively tell yourself. It's not like you can give yourself, 30 days of affirmations and it's going to sink in. It doesn't work that way. Mm-hmm. But most people are not supported in seeing that they have a process. What holistic synergy is going into the creation of that process? And then to legitimize and learn how to be present to it so that it can become more and more potent with more and more you available and engaged and able to be the conduit.
Can I ask a question, though? Let's see if I can break it down for my own mind. I also had a soul map done by Lissa, just to share with all of you listening. And it's a really beautiful thing. I actually still go back to it sometimes in my own mind. Lissa has a way with words. You said something to me like part of my calling was to help people bring all of their parts to the party. And anyone who knows me knows that talking about a party is a perfect word because I just want us all to delight in life together. So, but let's say someone doesn't have a soul map done, So what I'm hearing is there's this first place where you're sort of assessing like what's true for me, what's alive, what keeps speaking to me, like who am I, what are my values, right? What are the things I turn over in my mind all day long? And then there's this second piece where we go out into the world and we kind of see, is the world responding, right? Is this making a difference when I live from this place, when I share this with others? And then once we start to get hip on that, not only is there just a process of unfolding, but there are practices that we want to employ so that we can live true to our purpose. Am I understanding a little bit about a framework?
Yes. Practices, they're like repetitive habits of behavior that actually cultivate your capacities to be present, to experience legitimacy, to draw forward your potency so that you can have effect without tinkering with it much. So this isn't about tinkering with people. It's about the fullness of your presence as that expresses itself through your talents and your gifts, through your synergy. I call it a synergy because that's the holism factor. It's all these things expressing in synergy to have effect that you can't reasonably predict exactly. So I didn't know, I still don't know to this day what someone's lived experience after working with me is going to be like. Based on, it's been since I first launched the Soul Map and really got clear about the work that I'm doing, it's been not quite 10 years. So over the course of 10 years, I can begin to see universal probabilities, but I can't predict. And the more I attempt to get in there and cause something particular to happen, the less effective it becomes. So are there practices? Yes. And what I'm learning is that they are habits of beingness that you have to cultivate. And they're not things that you can do up here. They are actual practices. So, for example, one of my leading values is honesty. Well, what honesty means to me must be investigated. I need to understand what that is right down to the marrow of my bones, and not from what I've learned about what honesty is or isn't in my head. Mm-hmm. I have to learn what that feels like when I'm in it and when I'm out of it, even just a little bit. I have to be able to tell in the slightest sensation with greater accuracy when I'm in honesty and when I am not. Because it won't look the same for me as it will for you. It has its slightly different makeup because my expression of this thing called honesty is unique to me. It's an expression of the divine when it comes through clearly, but it's going to be unique. It's going to be different. Again, there's universals in honesty, but how am I supposed to live it? And I have to practice living that well every single day. And when I don't, go back and correct whatever it might have set off in motion that probably isn't going to produce a great, response in the world for myself or for anybody else. The other thing I also wanted to talk about is process. Artists of all kinds, whether they are a potter, a painter, a glass blower, anybody who is involved in artisanal work that involves hands and the making of things, which is, I think, one of the reasons why the maker movement is so big. Mm-hmm. We are attempting to return to recognize that we are part of a process, a creative process. Mm-hmm. And that even though we may not be making something with our hands, we're making something, culture being one of those things in the largest sense. So when I say process, what I mean is this: most artists, writers, glass blowers, whatever, they have to learn through witnessing when they do their best work, how they do their best work, under what light or what conditions or what environment. If I don't get enough sleep, what happens to the work? If I'm in a different kind of light, what happens? But they're expected, because they've been forthright about the fact that they have one, that there is a process, and they have to remain faithful to that and lean into it and optimize it. And that becomes a kind of prayer, because it allows for the most extraordinary work possible. The more they lean into their process and live it like a devotion, the more extraordinary the work becomes. Having said that, the average person who doesn't recognize themselves to be an artist, especially purposeful people, they don't recognize that they have a process. That the same kinds of questions apply to them. They're not taught. We're not taught to look at how we function, where we lean back, as signs and signals of process, so that we can learn through our own life's signals, what our process is, so we can optimize it as effectively as possible. And that's part of the legitimization process. It isn't just my talent or my gift. It's also my process. Mm-hmm. How do I go about doing this in a way that is unique to me? There may be universal pieces of it that's similar to you. Reiki person to Reiki person, we kind of do this and kind of do that. But how you channel that energy will be unique to you as an individual. Otherwise, there'd be no reason for you to be here. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think about it a lot when you're, sorry about that, Brooke, I recognize, okay, this is my calling on some level. I don't know if there's a period at the end of this, but to work with people and to be with them in love and in conversation. And I recognize, okay, well, I can't really drink a lot. I have to be careful with sugar. I have to sleep, because it's very clear when I'm going to go off the rails and when I lose presence, because if I can't offer someone presence, then what am I offering? I'll cancel on a client if I'm off presence because they deserve that. So I think it's really a beautiful thing to be talking about sort of commitment, that these callings and our purpose is not this little thing. It's our soul movement, and it requires this sense of commitment. And what this is picking up on what you mentioned earlier, Brooke, about the big thing, is like one thing I think can get us in a quandary is our ego thinks it should look a certain way, wants it to be a certain way, can fall into traps of self-doubt and questioning. Many people wouldn't have the confidence that you just shared with this woman you were sharing the story about earlier to say, I belong to myself, like what amazing thing that we could say, I belong to me, So I wonder, for someone who doesn't have a soul map and is stuck in a moment of ego confusion, sort of like, what's my purpose? That question can feel really crunchy and achy for people. How might you, what might you offer them to begin to explore that for themselves?
Yeah. So, I'm going to offer some tidbits from my own process because I didn't have a soul map and I didn't have a soul mapper. So, one, what things are you repetitively drawn to? What do you keep returning to again and again and again, either in question or, and I don't mean, why am I so weak? I'm not talking about that. I mean, although I want to come back to that in a second. But so one of the things for me is I had this moment years and years ago, and I hope I'm not going to spoiler alert, folks. If you haven't watched Mr. Holland's Opus, you might want to tune out for the next minute. At the end of the film, there's a moment when he is recognized by all the students he's taught. He took a job teaching to fund his life, to provide for his family. He took the job teaching music because he needed to take care of himself. But his first love and what he thought was his purpose was to create music, to write music, and really to write a Broadway musical of substantial value. And I don't mean, cash money on the barrelhead. I mean, awards and accolades and, oh my God, this is life-changing music. The fact that it was going to make money was a nice thing too, but it was really, he wanted to create music that touched and changed people. And he thought he had failed because he spent the vast majority of his life as a music teacher. And on the day that he was retiring, his students, mostly, because he'd been there, 25 years, came together, and a smattering of them from 20 years ago, 5 years ago, yesterday, came together in an orchestra and played the opus from this piece of music he'd never gotten published in front of this enormous audience, including his wife and his son. And he was dumbstruck by it because he'd never heard it performed before. And I fell apart watching the end of that film. Now, anybody who knows me knows it doesn't take much to make me cry, but this was not, this was, I'm on my knees in the bathroom sobbing so hard that it hurt. I recognized something. I recognized something that was alive, and those sobs, it took me years to understand what it meant, but I was grieving for something that somehow I was supposed to live, but I couldn't even begin to get my head around what it was. Something in me recognized it and yearned for it so badly. I was a puddle, a grieving mess on the floor in the bathroom. Now, just so you know, I'm a sun sign Leo. When I do not feel, and I'm a sun sign Leo in an extroverted position, what that essentially means is I'm a contrary Leo. I don't like being on center stage unless I have the opportunity to talk about the work that my life is about. Okay. Otherwise, vastly prefer to be in an extroverted position and in a supporting role. But I can be on stage or in the spotlight or in a conversation where other people are, watching, with absolute okayness when my purpose is at the center of it, when what my life's supposed to be talking about is there. But when I was a kid, attempting to express that, I was accused of trying to get attention, that I was an attention hog, that you name it, that's what it was. And so when I attempted to express this to a member of my family, they just looked at me and went, yeah, well, that's just you disappointed you didn't get to be on stage. Like it was just whammo. Mm. And that, the delegitimization of an impulse that was so alive for me caused me to stumble over interacting with it and listening to it for what it was rather than what I thought it was and had been taught to think it was. So the reason I tell the story is because when we are in the presence of ourselves or some piece of our expression, we will be moved. Often through repetition or extraordinary physical sensation, often coupled with emotion. And sometimes physical sensation and emotion are distinct, but they're usually coupled. So if you pay attention to the things that you are repetitively returned to, and you make a practice of lifting away the judgments that you have taken on about it, and explore it just for what it is. So you can ask it to tell you, what is it about this that is moving me so deeply and keeps me, like I'm chained to this. I keep coming back to it. Why do I keep coming back? Why does this fascinate me? And I had to ask that about astrology. What is it about this that fascinates me, damn it? I don't want to be fascinated. This is going to make me look like a complete nut. So sometimes we're at total odds with the fascination that it is what drives us. It's the locomotive. But because we're concerned that we will be delegitimized, we delegitimize it first so we can prevent someone from causing us harm. But that keeps us out of relationship with it. So essentially what I'm saying is pay attention to the things that you are repelled by repeatedly and attracted to, returned to repeatedly, and for the emotional and physical sensations that come when you are. Because the thing to do is to take yourself into open-hearted, inquiry-driven relationship with it so it can tell you the truth of you. Mm. And then recognize that there's more than one. There will be pieces. And perhaps do what I did in your own way, shape, or form. Catalog it. Keep track of it. Initially, I would just take this piece and I'd put it in a file folder. And I'd take another piece and I'd put in another. So at the end, I had this much material. But then I pulled it up. One day I just went, okay, I have enough. I didn't know how I knew that. I just knew I did. And I put it up on a great big wall in stickies. And I looked for the relationships and connections. And they weren't mental. They were felt sense. Mm. No, that's supposed to be over here. How do you know? I just do. So sometimes you just have to legitimize your sensibilities. Mm-hmm. Remembering that if it wants to be someplace else next week, you can move it. Or maybe it wants to be here and over here. Sorry, my little beagle in the background.
Beagles make noise. It's all good.
Beagles make noises. Sometimes what I learned is that an aspect of expression doesn't show up in just one place. Mm-hmm. Doesn't show up. There's different kinds of horns in the orchestra. So you can have a horn here and a horn there. Okay. So to be open to and experience the pieces as if they were instruments in an orchestra. Where do they want to be? What are they organizing themselves in partnership with? Do those partnerships interact with other partnerships? So you can begin to explore the relational energies between your talents the things that pull you and the things that you kind of step away from. Mm-hmm. So another example from this woman that I mentioned earlier who said, I'm a highly sensitive introvert. I don't do things that way. Well, okay, so you're repelled by things, but for good reason. A lot of people say, what you resist persists. Bullshit. That's whitewash. That's big, broad brushstroke. Wait a minute. What just happened to the fact that you're a unique expression? One size fits all? How does that work? So if you are a true introvert, how does the power of introversion express itself? And how does it express itself uniquely through you? And what does that do to the landscape of these things that you're pulled and attracted to? And the talents through which you want to express those things. Does this all sort of make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, just to underscore that is so beautiful and unique about what you're describing is that you're in this sphere of purpose and career and entrepreneurship, but you're asking people to listen to their being, and what is communicating through being the divine, so that's a completely different way than like, it would be impressive if or good people write books or, whatever the storyline is. And that's really profound. And also to let it lead you, and also to be able to tolerate not knowing for as long as you don't know, that you're paying attention to the resonance. For me, the intersection of deeply understanding the functioning of the human body, what the human body is, and God, spiritual path. I have spent the longest time going, why these two things? Which team do I pick? Do I pick
like
team God or pick team body? Yeah. And just seeing, no, it's so perfect. It's exactly what it's meant to be, because the way they play together is what I uniquely can bring to the world. And that continues to unfold and go on. But as long as I was caught in like one or the other of them must be a mistake, or like, ooh, maybe it's that other shiny object over there, which is completely unrelated, then I can't see how the orchestra is playing together for as long as I'm ready to have to be reductionist about it,
Right. You said something really interesting about that, be okay with not knowing. Yes, and I've recognized something about not knowing. I don't know tends to completely obliterate what you do know. It just tends to completely, it's like going like this and wiping everything off the surface of a table or a desk. It's like, wait a minute, wait. Why don't we just focus on what you do know right now and lean into the potency of that with whatever presence you're capable of and work from there. Whatever you don't know will filter in if you don't obliterate. Like, one does not necessarily mean there's nothing here. Bring your presence back, because a lot of people go, I'm uncertain, and they go into the primal source of, and really the only source of scarcity, as far as I can tell, and that's the scarcity of you. The scarcity of your presence. When that form of scarcity is being lived, and every other form of scarcity is an expression of that, as far as I can tell. Particularly when it comes to, I don't know. Well, okay, you don't know about that, but what do you know? So that's why the back of the Oprah magazine, what I do know for sure. I'm like, okay, so give me 10 things you do know for sure, and let's focus on them right now. And then let's feel into them. Which ones rise to the top and take primacy right now?
So helpful.
Which ones? So yes, you're going to be uncertain, but uncertainty does not negate you.
And knowing that you know things now.
That's right.
There is knowing. Yeah.
That's absolutely
and that your purpose may not be so far outside of what you do. As you said about spirituality, right? Like Brooke and I just talked about it. We're like, it's right here in what you're doing right now.
Right. It's really not that thing over the rainbow. It's happening now.
It can't be anything else.
It's happening now.
There's silos and they happen, it's like, oh my God, no.
Yeah.
They don't function that way.
Right.
Somewhere God is laughing.
I know.
Right,
it's so funny.
Super curious. It's happening. It's all happening. Get really curious about yourself and really curious about where you might be shutting something down inadvertently in all innocence, and get curious about what fascinates you. It is so ridiculous how simple things can be. Not necessarily easy, but so simple. Like, it's there.
Even in their complexity, they are simple.
Yeah.
They are simple. And if you hold the truth that right now you're expressing something of potency and value, it doesn't matter whether you're uncertain about something else. There's things you know and can offer right now to yourself and to everybody else. So it doesn't, because the idea that if you don't know at all, right here, right now, suddenly means you are without effect, without value, without worth, without potency. It doesn't just wipe off the table, it wipes off you. Like, all of a sudden, you're not here. And that's the scariest thing of all.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for what you said, Brooke, because it's not something we get to talk about very often, and you just triggered it. So thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that was a mic drop moment. So thank you both for unearthing that one.
Yeah.
And thank you for all the work you're doing, Lissa, to lead people into being and their purpose.
Leading myself, please.
I know. We are always leading ourselves too. Yes, we are. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate the conversation. I'm imagining you guys are noticing this too, probably because you wouldn't be doing a podcast unless you were. People are hungry for frank conversations about what's really up.
Yeah.
And the ways we've approached this historically, they don't really work no more. Mm-hmm. And we've all known that for a while. And that's why looking out there, it doesn't work anymore. It's got to come. Now it's got to come from here. But we haven't been well prepared for that. The capacities, the understandings that are key, I haven't been readily available. And I understand why people are so confused and disoriented. So I want to say thank you for being willing to host conversations that are this robust and honest and courageous and deep, because it matters. And I really appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, my dear.
Yeah, we need each other really deeply, and I'm very glad that you're out there.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. For more on Lissa Boles, you can go to her website, which is thesoulmap.com. And the show notes, including any resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. If you go to the website, you'll see each episode has a separate post. Our member platform is at patreon.com/blissandgrit, where you can donate to the show, but you can also get rewards for your support. Mostly if you're wanting to really get into these topics in a deeper way and have some community, that's a great place to go for a more immersive experience. And of course, you can come say hi on Instagram and Facebook, or subscribe to the website where we send out a Friday digest of what we're texting each other or laughing about or reading. We're really grateful for all the reviews that you have already written and for the membership support that you've provided. Here's a review from Theadra Frangos. I love this podcast so much gratitude for what you offer. Each episode is a gift of connection, insight, and synchronicity. Thank you for your offering. Thank you so much. And we'll be back next week.